What are the obstacles to charitable giving faced by donors? Oh, as fundraisers, don't we want to know the answer to that question? Yes, we do. And that's why you are in the right place. The First Day from the Fundraising School podcast. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and I'm joined today by Betsy Erickson. Betsy's the managing director of Arabella Advisors, and they have talked to donors and come up with 10 obstacles that donors say they face when it comes to charitable giving. And Betsy, what a delight to have you with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thanks, Bill. I'm really excited to be chatting today.
Yeah, same here. And before we launch into the study, there may be a few in our audience who are not aware of Arabella Advisors. Please tell us more about your organization.
Sure. So Arabella Advisors is a consulting firm really focused mostly on serving donors. We do have a segment of our work that's focused on back office management for nonprofit organizations, but largely we're a donor serving organization, a 450-person consulting firm with offices all around the country and doing work internationally as well, supporting clients to drive impact. And I lead our practice focused on family and individual clients, but Arabella works with corporate foundations, institutional foundations, and the vision for the firm has always been to really be a one-stop shop for donors and to really be able to connect dots across different types of donors and different issue areas to really build efficiency for donors and help them get to impact as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I'm in our Washington, D.C. office, which is our headquarters.
Betsy, your firm has done a study of donors, asking them what obstacles they face. Before we get into the study, why? What brought up this topic to be able to go and do the research and ask those donors what they were thinking?
Yeah. And I do want to be clear, it's actually a collaborative report. So this work was funded by the Gates Foundation, particularly sort of the Gates Foundation team that is working with ultra high net worth donors through the Giving Pledge and other activities, really trying to understand field trends and help influence, large amounts of capital to be deployed most strategically. And then the three other partners besides the Gates Foundation were Arabella Advisors, and then the National Center for Family Philanthropy, which is an affinity group helping families do their best work and sort of crack the code between collaborating as a family and working in the impact space. And then the really interesting piece was, and I'll speak to the problems and the generation of the report, was a partner called Ideas 42, which is a behavioral science think tank, research entity, and consulting firm. And so what we've done here is not just sort of stated problems, but actually given the behavioral science behind them. And the co-author with me, Payush Tantia, is the behavioral science expert. So what really brought this together was, again, sort of these four partners who were noticing trends from a couple different angles. And so we at Arabella were really seeing a lot of our clients over the last decade, but particularly the last 5 years or so, really sort of facing such a higher processing burden, more stuff coming at them, more to weed through, many more choices than in the past, whether that's choices of structures and vehicles or choices of sort of nonprofits or ways to give in terms of models like trust-based philanthropy or strategic philanthropy or incorporating DEI. There's just a lot of processing and learning that needed to happen. We're also seeing people really feel more connected to societal problems and really feeling like those problems are very intractable issues and there's connections between them. If we think about people wanting to preserve democracy or, improve the education system, there's much more recognition that these are deeply rooted sort of systemic problems that require new kinds of solutions. And then we're seeing just so much rampant binary thinking in society, which is kind of difficult for donors to think through. And that binary thinking is also showing up in donor couples and in donor families. And so they're managing a lot sort of inside and outside related to this. And then we're just generally seeing people feel more connected than ever, but also less connected. And I'm sure, many people listening to this can feel that, where you might be sending out many, many more communications, or you're communicating with donors via texts and via email blasts and via Instagram posts and as many mechanisms as possible. But you also might be facing a harder time connecting actually in meaningful ways with your donors. And I think we're seeing our clients again face that in their family relationships, but also in their relationships to giving.
Betsy, what I'm hearing in your answer are donors who are quite sophisticated, quite thoughtful, not being passive when it comes to their charitable giving, wanting to be very intentional and very impactful. And as they're taking this very thoughtful, strategic approach, you and your colleagues, your partners, have identified some obstacles that these donors see, that they feel, that they experience. What did your study reveal?
Yeah, so the 10 barriers, and again, these all have the behavioral science behind them, are too many choices, right? They're just, again, a multitude of pathways people can take. And so if you've got an hour or two on a Tuesday night to sit down with your spouse and talk through these things, it's really overwhelming. And that is not totally new, but in many ways, again, with sort of globalization or a more understanding of these intractable issues, it's feeling like the choice burden is more significant. We also see donors have more sort of burdensome and tedious tasks. Many of these wealthy families, it's not just that they're thinking about these explosion of tasks in philanthropy, there are many across all of the domains of their wealth management. And we can sort of say like, oh, the poor wealthy people. But honestly, when you really see this in action, you see that in many ways, sort of the broader service sector hasn't kept up with how to best serve these families, and a lot of the quarterbacking and the burden is on families themselves. And so these burdensome and tedious tasks, they're spending too much time on them, leaving too little time for meaningful work. Sometimes we're seeing a lack of urgency. Some of that behavioral science wise might be like other people are dealing with that, or democracy's too big for me to fix. And so what are my dollars going to do now? We're also seeing, with the increased use of donor advised funds, which are really great tools, but also there's no forcing mechanism like a payout requirement. And so we're seeing, a lot of money just sort of sitting in donor advised funds because of the lack of urgency piece. With some very fair questions society is asking about wealth creation and use of wealth and wealth inequality, there is also a really increased fear of attention and public scrutiny,
Mm.
to make mistakes or to try something new or to fund, again, with polarization, many of these issues, people fear backlash around funding what they care about. And so there's this sort of fear of attention and public scrutiny, which is another piece that's sort of stumping people a bit. Many of our clients, are really high achieving people and maybe bring perfectionist tendencies. And so there can be a real desire to sort of learn everything and know everything before you get started. And so that's, again, really hard when you're trying to learn everything about approaches in philanthropy, about the issue you care about who you are, right? There's too many things to try to learn it all before you get started. And so people like needing to learn through doing a little bit more, but we're seeing that as stumping. We're also seeing, as and it mirrors societal trends about lack of trust in other people or lack of trust in institutions. We're seeing a lack of trust in nonprofit organizations really showing up. And part of that, the behavioral science behind some of that is really this sort of, it's called the availability heuristic, where we're going to tend to remember and pull up horror stories versus, so the nonprofit executive that embezzled will stick in our mind for 20 years, but the
Mhm.
thousands of really wonderful leaders that are doing things right and have bold ideas might not stick as much. And so being mindful of that. We're seeing families fear discord and uncomfortable dynamics. And so they might individually or even collectively want to fund something like democracy or reproductive rights or supporting DEI initiatives, but they are scared to even start conversations like that and bring up sort of discord in the family. And then number 8 is feeling really uncomfortable with risk and uncertainty, and really needing to sort of remind people that oftentimes, like, philanthropy should be some risk capital, and we should be investing in new leaders and bold ideas. But there is this sort of lack of comfort in sort of doing something that might fail or might not run perfectly. And part of that comes from the 9th barrier, which is operating with a scarcity mindset. Sometimes that
Mm.
scarcity in a very dynamic time, people feeling like, what math equation do I need to really ensure my family is set up and safe forever and ever? That might feel different than it did 15 years ago. But also, again, a scarcity mindset around, we can only spend the 5%, or, I don't know, should that nonprofit get, general operating support? There's sort of this scarcity mindset sort of throughout the whole equation. And then the final one, which I think we all feel these days, is that donors really have a lack of time. Many more people are creating wealth earlier and creating more of it, and they might be raising children or still deep in their careers. And again, there's more information and chaos around them. And so this lack of time, I think, is showing up for all of us. But when we see what that really does to our brain, and again, there's really powerful behavioral science and psychology studies that really powerfully demonstrate what a lack of time can do to, like, intrinsic motivation to do good. And so that's sort of, we dig into that in the report.
And to just bookend it, your first obstacle was too many choices, and your last obstacle is not enough time. Those two things really feed upon each other. Betsy, I'm sure you're using these findings to further fine tune the excellent consulting service you're already providing through Arabella Advisors to individual donors and to foundations and corporate foundations. I'd like to ask you, from the perspective of the nonprofit organization, from the professional fundraiser, how would you hope that they could use these findings? What advice do you have for them? Do any specific recommendations come to mind as they engage and communicate with these donors to be able to learn from these 10 findings and to be able to respond to donors appropriately?
Yeah, and I know that probably everyone is really noodling through those questions, and it's a really tough time. I used to be a fundraiser. I think it's a really unprecedentedly challenging time to be a fundraiser. I think we're seeing a lot of donors kind of ping-ponging between things. It's hard to kind of get that staying power with a donor relationship. And again, donor advised funds and things where you might not even know who your donor is or what they care about is really challenging. But I would really focus people on trying to build those deep, authentic relationships. You might need to do more work to sort of educate and empower donors. We hear from clients all the time who are newer to giving, like, we don't know what we don't know. And so really trying to sort of simplify or tell stories about how your other donors have engaged with you and how it's been meaningful, or how they learned through doing to support education, or the work you're doing with unhoused people in your community. Sort of what was their pathway and how did they layer from getting started to learning about more strategic opportunities. So I think there's a lot of need for trusted advisors from the nonprofit sector to really engage in that sort of learning process and sort of scaffold people through, another donor's lens. I think engaging, which again, very hard, engaging your board or other donors to approach newer donors so that you can get past the lack of trust piece by having a peer that comes in and can share their perspective. I think being maybe cleaner about communications in a time that is very chaotic, and maybe naming some of these feelings that people might be having. So, we could bombard you with, we communicate across all different kinds of channels. We could do that, but would you prefer that we just, have a check-in every quarter, or we send you something more personalized? Like, what would help, you reduce the burdens that you're feeling? So I think, reading through these and maybe naming some with donors and coming up with a collective shared vision for how the two of you can get through it together could be useful. I think there's some interesting stuff, and I would actually love to hear if any fundraisers do read this, sort of what insights that they've found useful that might change their practices. And I think that'd be really powerful sort of next phase of the research.
Betsy, where my mind went, you use that phrase scaffolding, is that for me, this report is yet another reminder to fundraisers that we need to be developing longer term relationships with our donors. Now, it's just the morally right thing to do, to treat people, as human beings, not just the source of a gift, let alone a quick gift, that we should be looking for all of these reasons to be developing longer term relationships, which by definition, longer term, take time. And so if I'm talking with donors who feel that they have so much information that comes at them too quickly, that they don't have time to process, but yet the donor says, I still need more information before I make a decision. And what impact am I going to have? Now, we might not be able to help them with the family dynamics piece, which is just, one feels this way about an issue, one feels that way about an issue. But in these other areas, a reminder for us to take our time with our donors, keep it simple, a little bit of information now, a little bit more the next time, a little bit more the next time. Now we're maybe doing a tour. Again, that's where my mind went. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but to me, it was just a reminder of we're in this for the long term. Let's take our time and make sure the donor is able to absorb this on their timing before they make these big decisions about charitable giving.
Yeah, I think that's right. And your point brought up for me, I'm part of a group called the Ultra High Net Worth Institute, which is sort of a think tank of like how people like me can do work better with this segment of ultra high net worth families. And there was a really powerful speaker that talked about, you need to show your IQ, your EQ, but also your MQ. And so that's motivational quotient.
Oh,
You think about a donor, they're constantly being inside philanthropy, but also across the board, they're constantly being sort of judged or asked for money from family members, friends, people in the community. And so if you can stand out by showing a motivational quotient that, yes, is impact focused, and yes, you need their money to drive impact, but also sort of expanding your aperture to sort of ask questions like, what do you feel up against as a funder? Or when you think about the change you want to see in education or whatever issue, what is feeling hard? Also thinking about if you're new to an issue. I was on a call recently with a newer donor focused on maternal health. And, we got on the phone with some, potential grant organizations, and it became very obvious that the donor didn't fully understand the medical system, right? Like the healthcare system and reimbursements and sort of the context in which the nonprofit organization was operating. And they did an artful job of trying to step back and say, you might not be able to make or understand our impact or this grant without understanding this piece. So let's take a pause, and we're going to send you a couple YouTube videos or articles that can explain sort of how healthcare works, or where are the gaps for an immigrant mother, because it's so far away from your life. And so it was recognizing that sort of learning experience and scaffolding moment, and what they were positioned to do that was inside more of a pitch versus what other information this donor might need to feel empowered to make a decision.
Betsy, where can our audience obtain this study, or at least an executive summary?
Yeah, we will put a link to the study, I understand, in the podcast notes, and I think in an email that will be sent out with this. Otherwise, if you want to refer people to it, or you forget to look for that link, it's housed on the National Center for Family Philanthropy, ncfp.org. And if you just look for psychological barriers, you can find it there. And again, happy to sort of hear from folks if they find it useful or have questions or ideas for where we take the research next.
Betsy Erickson is Managing Director at Arabella Advisors, one of 4 partnering organizations that has created this study about the psychological barriers that donors are facing related to their charitable giving. And Betsy, thank you so much for clearly describing those 10 findings, but also importantly, giving fundraisers some good practical application on how they can use this information to even better serve their donors. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Bill. It was a real honor.
And of course, we talk about donor relations in all of our courses at the Fundraising School, 24 public courses in all that lead to 5 different certificates. We can also customize this training specifically for your nonprofit, your region, your association. We're in person in 10 U.S. cities, online anywhere across the world. And we also have our quarterly webinars. We have these weekly podcasts and all of our knowledge gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, now out in the book's 5th edition. Where do you find this information? Online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm so grateful for my colleagues, Mike Anthony, the Emmy Award-winning producer, Jennifer Boffman, CFRM, also producing today. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.